Let's get a cocktail soon and we'll go from there.
It's been a long time coming. The tide is turning. We tired of running. We rising up. It's been a long time coming. They pride is hurting. Shake off that burden and that dirt in. Bounce. It's been a long time coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Raj Nation Innovations Discover Your Inner Awesome podcast. My name is Rajiv Nathan, aka The Raj Nation. I am your show's host. I'm the founder of Raj Nation Innovation, a hip-hop artist and a yoga instructor. Above all else, I am a storyteller. I am joined by my co-host, Victoria Cohen, aka VC Money. Victoria is the voice behind Almonds and Asana. She's a yoga instructor, a blogger, a health, wellness, and fitness enthusiast. Above all else, she is an activist. This is Discover Your Inner Awesome, the only show where you get to eavesdrop on conversations with entrepreneurs, startup founders, artists, and musicians about the stories, the journeys, the struggles, but most importantly, the questions that help creative thinkers like you and I better understand who we are, what we're doing, and how we can do it better. It's real talk with real people doing real big things to show you the real side of success. In this episode, we sit down with Katy Lynch. Katy's resume includes founding the social media agency SocialKaty several years ago, then going on to become the CEO of Techweek. Most recently, she's co-founded a new venture called Codeverse, where the mission is to teach 1 billion kids to code. Our conversation with Katy is centered around hustle. Specifically, we ask the question, how do you maintain your hustle? Before we dive into that conversation, I want to give you a quick invitation to go and join our community, our tribe, over at www.discoveryourinnerawesome.com. Enter your email address there. You will never miss another episode of this show, as well as stay up to date with all the other awesomeness going on related to the Discover Your Inner Awesome podcast. All right, all that said, let's dive in now to our conversation with Katy Lynch. How do you maintain your hustle? Let's listen in.
Well, I guess first and foremost, it kind of all goes back to being curious, right? And always wanting to learn. So I guess my kind of greatest example of that would be when I first moved to Chicago on my own back in 2007. I didn't really know anything about what it meant to be an entrepreneur, didn't really know anything about what it meant to start a business. And I worked for a travel startup that was based in Bucktown called Where I've Been, which was founded by my now husband. And when I first joined that company, I was hired on to effectively manage all of their marketing efforts. And so I did that for about 2.5 years. And you know, one big thing that you learn being at a startup is that although you may be placed in one role, you kind of find yourself rolling up your sleeves and getting scrappy and kind of filling multiple different roles within the company. And so before I knew it, I was doing sales and business development and PR and all sorts of different roles within this company. And I really enjoyed it, right? Because I got to kind of learn loads of different departments and really kind of learn the ins and outs of what it meant to run a startup. And I think that, you know, my kind of intellectual curiosity kind of led me into, well, if I'm learning about all of these different aspects of the company, what else can I learn? And so I started learning more about the technology that we used at this travel company and the product and the financials, and really just learned. I was basically just like a sponge for like 2.5 years, just absorbing as much as I could about the startup world and about the specific startup. And just having that curiosity and always asking questions and kind of challenging everything and asking why led me to start my own company in 2010. When the startup that I worked at was sold by TripAdvisor. And so I spun out and I started a marketing agency called SocialKaty. And really I knew from kind of the get-go starting that business that our end game was going to be to sell it. Like I knew that I wanted this company to be acquired by a much larger digital agency because social media cannot really act as a standalone service. And so with that in mind, I remained basically very focused over a 4-year period, basically growing SocialKaty into a social media marketing agency for small, medium, and eventually large brands. And so that kind of leads me into kind of the second kind of lesson I learned about how to maintain my hustle is remaining focused, right? And not being distracted by what every other agency and what every other competitor of mine was doing out there. Like, we had one goal to be one of the largest social media agencies in Chicago, and we achieved that. And that was all because we remained so focused on our mission and our vision. I'd say really like to kind of like go along with that, really the third kind of lesson I learned for maintaining hustle is having that passion and having that drive. You know, it's the reason why you get up in the morning. And when I look back at like SocialKaty and everything that me and my team did, it was exciting to get up every single day and work on problems for our clients and hire incredible people to, you know, manage all of these marketing campaigns for all of these different companies that we were working with. So I think that, you know, just having like being resilient and having that passion and being so excited about your mission and your vision and your values early on, like that's enough to keep going. It's enough to keep going, like through the mistakes you make, through the failures that you make, you know, through the ups and the downs. And then I'd say like one of the other things is the other lesson, I guess this is the fourth lesson, is like just always striving to be better personally, right? And this goes way beyond business. Like I look at myself and, you know, I'm a huge believer of like your health is your wealth. So like looking after yourself, looking after your body and eating right and, you know, always being present, right? Like as entrepreneurs, you're constantly getting caught up in, you know, the minutia of things, or you know, sometimes you get like kind of stuck in the weeds and you kind of think small, whereas you kind of have to get out your head and have a clear mind and look after yourself and look after your body and always strive to be better. And so one thing that I do, in fact, my husband and I do it together, is we make sure that we go to SoulCycle and rowing classes multiple times a week so that we can maintain healthy and maintain having, you know, good, positive, like healthy energy so that we can keep going. And so I'd say that those are like the biggest, you know, kind of 4 or 5 lessons for me personally that allow me to maintain my hustle. I'd say if there's one kind of final like piece of advice or final lesson that I've learned is surround yourself with incredible people, right? Like when you launch a business, not many people understand what that really means until they've been in the same situation as you. And I found that over the past 10 years, like my circles that I hang out with and like the people that I spend my free time with or the people that I bounce business ideas off of are essentially other entrepreneurs, or they're other people within the Chicago tech community because they get it. They understand my challenges. They understand what it really means to run a business essentially. And so it's just so important to just surround yourself with people that can give you perspective and can give you, you know, open like ideas and opinions and suggestions and advice. Because they're essentially the people that, you know, help you keep going. You're all in this together as like one big community.
So I love that these are kind of the 4 or 5 points that you touched on here. So to recap, it kind of comes down to what you covered was curiosity, keeping focus, passion, health or striving to be better personally, and surrounding yourself with incredible people. I think we can probably just unpack each one of those. I'm sure each one of those could be its own podcast on its own, but we could probably try to hit on and dive deeper into each of those 4 or 5. So let's start with curiosity. This one I think is really interesting on a personal level because for the last few years, I have oftentimes introduced myself to people as a human version of the cartoon character Curious George. So curiosity is very near and dear to my heart, and my business cards have Curious George on them. Still waiting to get sued for that one. But the reason why I've always been driven towards the idea of curiosity, and it's interesting because I don't think I realized it until I had been doing a handful of things and I reflected back. But if you look at the music side of me as a rapper. My first album that I put out, I was sitting in front of a quote that was, if you remember, this was in Chicago. This was like 7 years ago at the corner of State and I think Van Buren, right near DePaul. They rotated out sculptures for a while. And at one point, one of them was this giant eyeball, which then had a bunch of quotes on the like cement around it. So the quote I chose to sit in front of, not really cognizant of it, but I just knew at the time, I was like, oh, this really speaks to me, was a quote by Indira Gandhi, who was a prime minister of India. And the quote was, "The power to question is the basis of all progress."
Yes. Love that. And it's so true, right? It's like, human beings are just naturally curious, right? Like we're meant to break shit. We're meant to seek answers, right? We're meant to fail. We're meant to we're put on this earth to do all of these things. Yeah. And that to me is, that to me is, it's fulfilling and it's rewarding, like constantly learning and constantly just absorbing information. Otherwise, what are we doing, right? Like how do you ever grow as a person if you're not willing to, for lack of a better term, like throw yourself in the deep end of the pool, right? And just learn how to swim. I mean, you look at every great leader out there, right? Whether it's a prime minister or an entrepreneur, or just think of anyone. Like they made mistakes, they made failures, they did a lot to get to where they are today. It wasn't easy. They had struggles, they had challenges, right? They were constantly willing to learn and try new things, and that honestly is what it takes to be successful.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's actually really funny. So 2 things just came to mind. One that I hadn't thought about in years, and it's such an interesting example of this. When I was in high school, in like my junior year, I think it was, my, I don't even know what math class it was, pre-calc, something like that. And I asked so many questions that the teacher actually had to pull me aside and limit me to 3 questions per class. And I was like, yes, but Mrs., I don't remember who she was. No one else wants to ask these questions because they're scared, but they all want to ask them. So I'm going to ask these questions. And she was like, okay, Victoria, you can have 3 questions a class. This is out of control. So I'm totally with you guys. I'm definitely that person who asks a million questions. And then the other thing I was thinking of, and this isn't even this is more of just like a personal space. Like this weekend, I was on a bachelorette trip with a ton of girls that I didn't know. And I felt like every conversation I was playing that game 21 questions. Like when I meet a new person, especially when they're from somewhere different, I'm like, oh, well, why do you do this? And why do you believe that? And I probably am like so annoying, but I'm not asking to be annoying. I'm asking because I'm so curious. Like we come from really different backgrounds. Like I had so many interesting political debates, and I think that the most invigorating thing to me is asking questions and learning about something that I don't know, and that I otherwise, if I didn't ask those questions, I wouldn't know. And that's like, for me, that's like the lifeblood of being an excited, engaged human, and it definitely inspires my hustle to do more, in whatever direction that is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. It's like at the end of the day, the people that dare to think and dare to do are the ones that get ahead, right? It's like, as you said, the people that are willing to ask questions and challenge everything, but then also, those are essentially the same individuals that are willing to roll up their sleeves and just do. They get shit done.
Mm-hmm.
Whether the task or the action results in success or whether it results in failure, it doesn't really matter. What matters is just doing, thinking, and then doing.
Now, on that note, as well as Victoria, your point about just meeting people new, and it was at a bachelorette party, and you were so like curious and interested. So the funny thing about that is, so Katy, we were introduced by our mutual friend Chris, and Chris and I met actually a few years ago at a different mutual friend's bachelor party, and we had like seen each other up to that point, like at different parties or whatever, because we both knew the same friend, but we would never actually talk to each other. So this bachelor party a few years ago was the first time we'd actually met and talked. And what was really funny about that was, it's this whole weekend in LA and like everyone's like going crazy. And then like half the time, like him and I just had like a connection off the bat because I was like, oh, I'm doing these things. And he's like, oh yeah, like I work with Techweek, yada, yada. And everyone's just like being idiots the whole weekend. And then half the time him and I are just like in the back talking shop. And that was kind of the basis of our friendship and our relationship. And we've been cool ever since. And it kind of touches then to that point, one of your last points you made in the beginning about surrounding yourself with incredible people and interesting people. And I think it's not just that they'll support you, but it's that they too are interesting and they are doing interesting things. Because I think if you only have support, like I think that works to a point. But then you run into, well, okay, but does their opinion really matter if they haven't experienced or they're not doing something, in this realm, et cetera? So I think they have to be doing interesting things as well, because then you can, A, like their opinion starts to carry more merit and value.
Yes.
And B, you start to get inspired by what you see them doing, and it almost becomes this like positive hustle or chase to where you're like, well, like if they're doing that, like I don't want to be the one who's falling way behind.
Well, and I think the more you ask questions, for me at least, the more, and I just keep thinking back on this one specific, very long political conversation I had with someone, and really like we're on very different sides of the fence, but I'm not so much interested in like arguing my case and just telling, I want to know why you believe in what you do. Poke holes in my ideas and my agenda so I can learn more and I can be a more inspiring, creative person. I think when you ask those questions, you become the type of people that people want to surround themselves with, because you've now become an interesting person and you now know more,
I think ultimately, like, this is all part of the process of getting older and getting wiser, right? Like you look back at your childhood, and every child, or like almost every child, is pretty much defined by like their zip code, right? And by like their family values and their upbringing, and by like the school that they went to and the community that they grew up with, and your life almost becomes or is like a bubble when you're young, right? All the way until you're like in college. And even then in college, you kind of continue to live in a little bit of a bubble. And I hope I'm not offending anyone by it's true, right? And only when you get out into the real world and you have these experiences, right? Whether you're working at a startup or your first job, or like you're learning and you're making mistakes, and you recognize the consequences or whatnot of mistakes. It's only when you have this real life experience that you kind of expand your horizons and you expand your mind, and you're a bit like, okay, I maybe don't relate to some of these people anymore that I grew up with, or I don't really relate to people that I was friends with in college. Like maybe a handful of them I still love for like various reasons, but as a whole, it's like, that community is a part of my past. And now I'm ready to, evolve and meet new people that are either like-minded, right? Like people who've gone through exactly the same thing that I've gone through, or people that just have similar experiences as me. And again, like it goes back to what I was saying before about like people that are not entrepreneurs, they just don't get it. And I don't mean to sound like, and like incredibly brash by saying that, but it's true. And any entrepreneur that's listening to this podcast knows exactly what I'm talking about. Like, if you have family that aren't entrepreneurs or have never been in the tech community before, they don't really understand your journey and what it is that you're really going through, which is why I think it is so important to find, as you said, individuals like Chris, right? Like people that are hustlers, that are go-getters, that have a positive attitude. Positivity is everything, by the way. Like I could talk about that for an entire podcast. Like that, good vibes, good energy, like your vibe attracts your tribe, right? Like attitude is everything. Attitude is what gets you everywhere in life, in my opinion. And then Chris is also like hardworking, right? And he's in this tech community and gets what it means to be an entrepreneur. And so it makes sense that individuals like you and me would want to hang out with other individuals like that.
So you're speaking my language here, and I will go even further and potentially and like really offend people when you talked about the idea of like the bubbles of a high school, growing up in high school and college. This thought crossed my mind a couple of years ago, and it is the idea that more than just bubbles, technically we are in these little like prisons until we hit college. And in college, you're still kind of in a prison, but college is really the first, because to that point, your friends are based on your geography and basically just who's around you and are they involved in the same activities more or less, which to an extent is what it ends up being anyways as an adult, but you end up having choice as an adult over those things, because really it's like you grow up and it's like, okay, well, this person lives next door, so I'm going to be friends with them as long as they will share their toys. And then you get into school and then it's like, well, I'm sitting next to these people in class, so I might as well start talking to them. And then you become friends with them. And then it's like, high school is more, it's kind of like a prison yard, especially if you're not allowed to like leave the campus at any point during the day. It's a positive prison, but in a way it is a prison, and you have a very regimented schedule and everything too. And you don't really get a chance to experience independent thought until college. And college it's more a bubble than it is prison, but it's kind of on that borderline because you're still kind of, it's like who am I in class with, and then that becomes your friends, or like who's in my dorm, more or less. And what you'll find is a lot of people will say they've had a tough time, whether they don't outright say it or if you just look at their friend group, they've had a tough time making new friends after college. Whereas I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum, and like a lot of my best friends have come after college. And I still have a handful of good friends from college, but like you, Katy, like that group from high school and then from college has dwindled significantly to like a handful of key members now.
Me too, 100%. Yeah.
And it's not like the other people, I don't like them or anything. It's just, your interests start to change and you don't value the same things anymore, and you grow in different ways. And I think what starts to happen as you move out of college and get into the quote unquote real world is, unless you take serious initiative to meet interesting people, then you don't ever break out of, those same people, outside of maybe coworkers but even then that's like, it's another contained environment where it's given to you. Whereas if you go out on your own, like you go to an event on your own, you create something on your own, that in itself forces you to have to meet new people who either become good professional contacts or personal contacts. But all this to say, I think, and I say this because when I started to see my friend group shift several years ago, I didn't like it because I was like, oh, what's wrong with me? Because you see everyone else and you're like, oh, like they've been friends since birth, like that kind of thing. Yes. And I saw that happening, like a lot of those drifting away from me. And then I started to realize, my philosophy anyway on just people and friends is certain people enter your life at certain times for certain reasons. And that was how I wrapped my head around it, and how I sleep at night.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that. It's like one of my good friends always says, people come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime.
I actually said that at my wedding. That was like kind of part of my vows. That's hilarious.
Nice. So Tommy's in your lifetime.
My husband's in it for I think the long haul. Hopefully. No, but actually, I wanted to mention this, Katy, when you brought up the positivity. I've talked about him on probably every episode. It turns out my dad is apparently my idol. My dad's a serial entrepreneur, and he's done a million different things. I think in large part due to his curiosity. I mean, it's literally taken him to every different possible business venture you could imagine. But we kind of always joke in our family that his best and worst quality is his extreme positivity. So sometimes it gets him into not trouble, but all right, you're a little overly zealous about this one opportunity. But I think that's also the thing that drives him. And at 65, he's going to keep working and be an entrepreneur till the day he dies, because he's got that curiosity, but also that positivity. Everything, he's like, oh, this is going to be great. And he's got that positive energy. And so I think that's a huge thing that ends up driving people.
Yes, absolutely. Everything boils down to attitude, right? People who are positive, as you said, they have great energy. And other people want to be around people that have great energy, right? Mm-hmm. People that are positive are confident. And confidence goes a heck of a long way, as you guys know. And anyone listening to this podcast really knows, right? You have the confidence. If you have confidence, you can essentially walk into pretty much any situation and win. As long as you're persistent and you have drive and you have passion as well, you're going to be successful. People who are positive are also incredibly self-motivated. And this goes back to your point earlier about after you graduated college, some of your friends had a hard time making friends outside of school. But then you were because of your positive attitude and confidence and you have self-motivation, you were willing to go out there and just meet people, right? Because that's what it takes. At the end of the day, you only get one life. Is the way that I look at all this stuff. So what do you want to do with that life? It's no one owes you anything in life. People are always going to treat you unfairly for whatever reason, but it's you just kind of have to bulldoze through that and be screw it. This is my life. This is what I want out of my life. I want to connect with these people. I want to do these things. I want to learn these new skills. And that ultimately boils down to your attitude.
I like that a lot. Now, amidst all this, so we've covered the idea of being super curious and wanting to always ask questions, of surrounding yourself with the right people, of wanting to constantly meet new people and interesting people, and then now the idea of the positivity. So all that said, one of the other points, Katy, you made in the beginning was what has helped you and what helped you with SocialKaty and getting it to a point of selling it to a major agency was remaining focused through that whole process. Yeah. Because you kind of had that goal of wanting to ultimately sell the company to a large agency. Now, given that we've just talked about constantly asking questions and remaining curious, meeting new people and always wanting to be interesting in that, and having the positive energy, a lot of those things can become distractions or can distract you in certain ways. How do we reconcile that against this idea of remaining focused?
Yeah, I think, and that's a really interesting question. And I think focus ultimately, so I'll talk about SocialKaty, because I think that's one of the best examples I can give, as well as what I'm doing now with Codeverse. I think for any aspiring entrepreneur that wants to start a company, it's really important to define your mission and your vision and your values very early on, right? Because those three things serve as your guide throughout your entire entrepreneurial journey. So what do I mean by that? When I first started SocialKaty way back in 2010, it was me sitting in front of my computer with my husband and really just defining, what is SocialKaty? What are the services that we want to offer? What are the different packages that we want to offer? And a lot of this was based on like research that we did with other entrepreneurs in town, right? Like I would bang on people's doors and say, okay, when you think of a social media marketing agency, and if you were to hire one for your business, what is it that you would want to see? What is it that you would want an agency to provide? And so kind of after I gathered all that feedback was around the same time that I was defining the mission, the vision, and the values of the business. So that means, what is SocialKaty? What do we provide for our customers? Who are our customers and where do we find them? Who are our main competitors out there? What do they offer? What makes us different from them? And our values, right? So our values meaning, what do we tolerate at the company? What do we not tolerate? What are the traits that we look for when we hire people? What are absolute no's, right? Like, again, attitude, like if you're negative and you're lazy and you don't like to think outside the box and you don't like to hustle, then that's a no. But it was really, the point that I'm trying to make is, it's so important to write all of this stuff down and to get it documented somewhere, right? Google Drive, wherever it is that you want to store this information, because all of this info serves as a guide and it keeps you focused for years. Because then, when you start thinking about like hiring employees, you can go back to your values. When you're thinking about firing an employee, you can go back to your values and you can cite those. When you make big business decisions, right? You can always go back to your mission and you can always go back to the vision. Does this align with our goals? Does this align with where we want to go and where we need to be? Yes or no? And that is what I think it takes to remain focused, is to have almost like that guidebook that highlights what it is that you're trying to achieve.
Let's pause for a hot minute for this quick PSA. Are you part of the startup community? If so, keep listening. If not, go ahead and hit the skip ahead button, because this is not going to apply to you. The Discover Your Inner Awesome podcast is a property of Raj Nation Innovation. What is Raj Nation Innovation? Well, it's simple. I talk to founders and startup teams every day who flat out tell me, hey, we suck at telling our story. I help remove the suck, combining a unique background of both branding expertise as well as songwriting expertise from my experience as a hip-hop artist. I take a performance lens and mindset to the world of business communication. Using this approach, I partner with growth-focused startups to help them develop their story, their go-to-market message, and their pitch so they can raise venture capital and acquire their early customers. Think of me like the Will Smith character Hitch, but for startups. And yes, I will tell you when you're dancing like an idiot. Does this sound like a conversation we should have? If so, head to www.rajnationinnovation.com. That's rajnationinnovation.com. Send me a message through there and let's chat. Back now to the podcast.
So I like this a lot, especially for the fact that a lot of business owners or just creative individuals in general they gloss over that part of it, either consciously or unconsciously. And if it's conscious, it's like, I'll get to that when I can. But if you take the time up front to think about it and write it out and actually, plan it out more or less, and it doesn't have to be something like, the glorious mission statement or anything like that. It can be something that's just like, this is what it is, this is what it's not. And here's the way I like to do things, or here's what I believe in. Just something as simple as that. It becomes very helpful it is that guidebook, as you said, because the decisions you make when you're big are going to be in the same vein as the decisions you made when you were small.
Yes.
And you'll start, and I see this with some individuals who they like to play entrepreneur or whatever, they like to play the role of what they think it is, but then they don't actually do the steps necessary to be that thing. So you'll see some people spend frivolously out of the gate. Like, oh, I need to spend a lot of money on logos, business cards, websites, etc. And if that's how you are when you haven't made your first dollar, once you start making even $10, like, you're not going to all of a sudden change your behavior.
Right.
So if you have that out, up front, and you're like, okay,
Setting that precedent.
exactly, yeah, that's the right word. It's precedent that you set by having that focus of the mission and the values.
Well, then that gives you a chance to say, and like you said, when you're making those same types of decisions further down the line, that gives you something to look back on, and almost like a best practice or whatever you want to call it, a precedent, and say, well, in this, like that, historically we've not done that, and that's just not the route that we go, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, ultimately, and it makes sense, right? Because like at the end of the day, you as the entrepreneur, you're the most passionate person about your brand. Like you're basically living and breathing your company every single day. So getting these, values and the mission and the vision and all these things down early on, it becomes very handy when you're talking to investors and you're hiring people, because then the expectation is set of kind of what you and your business is all about, right? And you see that with like the greatest companies in the world that have outstanding cultures. It's like all of them live and breathe the same guidebook, right? Whether they're at the company for 6 months or whether they're there for 5 years, it's consistent and it's harmonious, because it's almost like that Bible, that company Bible is like there that they can always go back to, always fall back on.
And on top of that, and you were saying how with SocialKaty, you kind of sat down and you were like, okay, what do we offer? What does this business represent? That kind of stuff. It really makes your decision making easier. And I'll tell you, my last business, Idea Lemon, which was personal brand coaching, our greatest downfall was that we didn't pick early on what we were and what we were not, which left us open to options indefinitely. And when we talk about the idea of focus versus distractions, it left us perennially distracted, because if you can take it in 10 different directions, then you will want to pursue all 10 of those directions, and you'll do all 10 poorly instead of just doing one direction very well and seeing it through.
Well, and this is actually kind of interesting because you mentioned this at that the speaking engagement last week.
The podcast.
Yeah, at the podcast. Yeah. I was like, what word am I looking for?
Podcast,
Oh yeah, a podcast, what we're doing right now. No, when I started, so I'm kind of doing a new little venture on my own here, and it's a blog. And when I first started toying around with the idea of it, it was super broad. Like I had all these different things that I wanted to talk about, and I talked to a friend of mine, and she was like, I think you need to pick like 2 of those things because it's just too much. And I'm so glad that I took that advice of hers, and it was a very similar thing that you mentioned in the podcast discussion. You were saying, don't just go out there and be like, I'm just going to podcast about the world. I pick something very niche and talk about that, and then maybe you grow that eventually. But starting specific and defined, it's so much easier to then expand, as opposed to if you start really broad, it's so much harder to rein that in and become sort of like a master. And I think that's just so true in all of these situations. Like if you don't, like you said, define it early on and really set your focus, it makes it a lot harder to ever really accomplish a whole lot out of the gate, because you're just all over the place.
Yeah, it's funny. I call it, I use this phrase a lot, and I have done over the past decade, is I call it shiny object syndrome. Like this is something that entrepreneurs have a lot of, is like they're working on something and then they see something in the corner of their eye, right? Like a new idea or a new avenue to explore, or they're looking at what their competitors are doing and they gravitate towards that. And honestly, I think that that's one of the biggest reasons why entrepreneurs fail, is they have this shiny object syndrome, which distracts them from their vision. And that's so, and it's hard, right? Because it's easy to get distracted. It's easy to look at your competitors and get pissed off and be like, I can't believe that they raised $5 million, or I can't believe that they hired this top executive from Coca-Cola, or I can't believe, there's always excuses and there's always shit that hits the fan. What's most important is stay in your own lane, focus on your own road. Don't get distracted by what all the other cars on the highway are doing, because you're going to crash and you're going to burn and fail.
It's very similar. So my friend Daniel DiPiazza, who's the founder and CEO of a company called Rich 20 something, and he just wrote a book by the same name. In the book, he writes about that topic, and he says, if you ever get jealous of someone else's success, he's like, you can respond in two ways. You can either say, "Oh, I can't believe," or like, "How did they do that?" or whatever, or "They don't deserve that." Or you could say, "How do I do that? How do I make that happen for myself? And what did they do to make it happen?" And you can ask that in a way that's informative versus destructive.
Mm-hmm. Yes, agreed. Wholeheartedly agree.
I want to dive into now in the last few minutes before we transition. So you also mentioned passion was helpful. I think we can say we all understand what passion is. The thing I really want to touch on, which is often overlooked, is you were saying striving to be better personally. Health is wealth. This is like a money statement, and I'll let you kind of get on a little bit more of a soapbox about it, Katy. But I say it's a money statement because, I am now in year 3 of entrepreneurship. My last business didn't pan out, and I'm on to a new venture now, which is doing really well over this year, and I'm happy about that. But more than anything, I personally am doing well because over the last 3 years, I basically it was almost like a life reset. I'm like, okay, if I step out of employment, like what do I want like my days to look like and how do I want to live my life? And I placed a heavy emphasis on, practicing yoga every day, meditating every day. And now, even as the work has ramped up, I'm not able to practice yoga every day, which part of it is the fact that now I teach yoga part-time, which makes it harder to practice yoga. But it's almost like my baseline was 7 days a week of exercise. So now if I miss 2 to 3 days a week, it's not devastating and I still feel good. Yeah. Whereas prior to that, because in the previous job I was working, I was just kind of like slogging every day and not working out. It's like if I go from that lifestyle and then never take the time to figure out what do I want out of my own health, then it's like I'm lucky to get 1 day out of the week to exercise, and that's my baseline. Whereas now it's like I'm pissed if I don't get 5 days out of the week to exercise, and it's like, but my bad week is 3 to 4 days.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's funny. This is such a hot topic, and it's a topic that either people want to talk about a lot or not talk about at all, right? Like working out and staying healthy, like healthy mind, healthy body, healthy soul, right? Is like the saying, and I think that I think that like there's a little bit of a misconception when people think about what it means to be an entrepreneur and also what it means to be healthy, right? Like I think when people think of working out, especially entrepreneurs, they're like, okay, that's basically just like me going to the gym and lifting weights, right? And like eating better, right? And it's like, yes, the physical benefits of working out are obviously extraordinary. And as an entrepreneur, you need to have energy and stamina to be able to run your business, right? Like the best entrepreneurs are the ones that, again, have great energy and they're in good health and they're in good shape to be able to run their business, right? But that being said, the benefits of working out go beyond that. It goes beyond like lifting weights or go to a spinning class and like losing weight or maintaining your weight or whatever it is. The benefits are emotional and mental as well. Like I look at, and I'll share some personal stories with you. So I grew up in the UK and I moved to America the first time when I was 12. And I played soccer. I played soccer in the UK. I played soccer in England. I played soccer when I first moved to Connecticut. And also when I first moved to Wisconsin when I was 16. And looking back at that experience, it wasn't just a recreational thing for me. It was a chance to bond with people and meet people. I learned a lot about teamwork. I learned new skills, right? I really challenged my body in ways that I never thought I'd be able to do before, right? Like, you learn a lot about competition and being competitive and traveling, right? Like, and then one thing, sorry, I forgot to mention, was when I went back to the UK for school, I went to Manchester University, I ended up playing on their varsity team, soccer on their varsity team, and we would travel a lot. We travel all around like Ireland and just all throughout the UK. And so there's like time management skills there, and like holding myself and holding my team accountable. So the point I'm trying to make is, like, physical exercise goes way beyond the physical. Like, you learn so much about yourself, you learn so much about others, you learn about what it means to be competitive and hold people as well as yourself accountable. And you learn what it really means to work together towards a common goal. And so even now that I'm, running my third business, I don't play soccer anymore, but I do participate in activities like SoulCycle, and I participate in activities like rowing, and I do 5Ks and 10Ks and things like that for that very reason, because it's not just about me maintaining stamina, it's also about me being able to bond with other people and challenge my mind as well as my body.
Yeah, I love that. I've always been an exercise person, and it's always been something, since college. I didn't play any like sports in college. I played sports when I was in high school, but it's definitely something I have always made like a huge priority to carve out in my day or my week, and I make that a really big priority in my life. And I think that the other things that it kind of can add for people is it gives you I think it helps people develop focusing on whatever that they're doing, getting better at it, building up, etc. And a certain discipline. Like, you have to have a discipline to sit down at the beginning of the week and say, okay, these are the 5 times I'm going to exercise, and like, I'm committing to doing that. Like, there's a serious discipline involved in that. And the endorphins. I know we talked about energy, but especially now that I teach like pretty full time, I feel like I'm just constantly on this energy high, even though my body is like actually physically crashing. But I mean, I just don't think I can ever express how important being physically active is for me. I'm a very kind of like tightly wound, anxious person, and it is 100% like my cathartic release. That, and actually sort of in the same vein of, healthy living, is like meal planning and meal prep and getting my whole little healthy lifestyle together. It's honestly like a cathartic thing for me.
It creates like a framework, right?
Exactly.
And then we live within frameworks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the final thing I'll add about physical fitness is, like, I feel like as entrepreneurs, sometimes you do get stuck inside your own head, right? Because you're sitting in front of your computer all day, or you're with your team, all day, or your investors or whatnot. So it's like you're solving very specific problems together. And I think that it's really important to kind of pull yourself away from work and do something like physical exercise, because other than like the endorphins and like having fun and meeting people and whatnot, it clears your mind. And in many ways, like, it's so, like, my husband and I joke about this, but there are times when Craig and I are trying to solve like issues, or we're trying to solve something like at our companies, right? And we'll be like, sitting at a round table, and we're like having a discussion, and then we'll go away and we'll go to SoulCycle for like 45 minutes. And after we've come out of that SoulCycle class, we'll both look at each other and we'll be like, wow, like, I think I've figured out a solution to that issue. Or I think, I've used that 45 minutes of my SoulCycle class to just breathe and just look at things from a 50,000 foot view, being outside of the office. And like, it's just hilarious how taking yourself on a walk or taking yourself out of the office, taking yourself out of the current situation that you're in, and just being able to breathe and really think clearly and be present. Being present is everything. Being mindfulness, allows you to kind of solve like challenges, so that you can go into the office and be like, wow, I've figured it out. And I only needed like 30 minutes on my own, or 30 minutes lifting weights, to be able to solve this challenge.
And I think that then that, like, sort of coming back to the whole hustle thing, I mean, I think sometimes stepping away and taking that break and doing whatever that physical healthful thing is, that like reignites your energy to come back and be like, okay, I can figure this out. I'm going to do it. And like, and I think that totally, there's definitely something to that.
And the two things I'll add to that point, Katy and Victoria, is I can personally say, like, I can think of 4 or 5 different, like, specific, I know it's been more than that, but I can recall 4 or 5 specific times when, like, in like wide-legged forward fold in yoga, I have had like a break, like a business breakthrough, because I'm just like detached, and it's, like you're in that moment, but I think because you're like living in a different moment, you end up approaching the same thing you were thinking about before in a different manner. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing too, Katy, is, let me know if this is something that I think you can relate to, but let me know if not, or if you agree with it. I mean, as entrepreneurs, we've all been on the brink of giving up at some point, and like, I think like that never goes away. And I can say that a lot of what's helped me keep pushing forward is my experience playing an organized team sport at some point in my life. And like, and I've various times in this podcast, I've mentioned my high school track experience, but like the summation of it is, started off as one of the slowest, ended up as one of the fastest on the team, and had a state or school records and placed in the state meet and everything like that. And that 4 years, like what that has given me for the rest of my life is, what that experience did was give me like, okay, you've been down and you've worked at something really hard and figured it out and gotten good at it. And so now, like the times when I'm knocked down, I mean, it's that song, but I get up again, right? But because I have that experience to draw from, I'm able to approach, some of these more like adult real world situations better because I have the experience. And I don't know if you have that same kind of philosophy having played soccer.
No, I do. Everything that you're saying completely resonates with me, for sure.
Awesome. Let's transition real quick and talk about Codeverse. So you launched a new venture recently called Codeverse. At surface level, it is a school or academy teaching kids to code, which is pretty damn good at surface level. But tell our listeners why it's about so much more than that.
Yeah, I'm so pumped to talk about this. It's interesting. We just came out of stealth mode at the beginning of April, but my husband, Craig, and I, as well as our third co-founder, Dave, and the rest of our team, I mean, we've been working on this for like 17, 18 months. And you're right. I mean, we're essentially building state-of-the-art studios where kids learn how to code using a real programming language that we've built from the ground up, called KidScript. And so with KidScript, children can build games, they can build apps that can be submitted into the App Store, but they can also essentially program any physical object that we have within our studio. So whether that's robotic arms or drones or laser cutters or 3D printers, or even lights and music speakers, all of these objects can be controlled by the kids using this language. So it's super innovative. We've never seen anything like this being done before. As far as what it teaches children, I mean, other than the obvious, teaching kids to build, right? It teaches kids life skills. Like, it's teaching them critical thinking, problem solving, how to be creative, how to be independent, how to collaborate with other children on projects. And in my opinion, like, these are really the skills that children need for the future, right? Is they need to learn how to be independent. They need to learn how to be creative. They need to understand how technology really functions and how it works. The other thing I'll say is, and I'm sure that you're aware of this, but there's all these articles now that are coming out saying that by the year 2020, there's going to be over 1 million unfilled tech jobs. And so when you look at the future and you look at like all these jobs that are going to exist and then some, like who's filling these roles? Which is why we need to set children up with these skills now. 21st century kids up with 21st century skills up now, because this is just the world that they live in. We live in the digital age, and technology is ultimately, it's already doing so, but it's disrupting every single industry and every single job. Like I am not surprised and shocked if every job in the future, whatever you're doing in whatever industry, requires some sort of has some sort of tech component to it and requires that skill. So again, it's important for future jobs. It's important for kids to understand how tech works, and just the other life skills that it teaches children, I think, are critical.
I absolutely love it. And I didn't even realize it was to that kind of detail of like, you can move the objects in the room by programming them in the right way. Like that's taking practical application to a whole new level, which is fascinating. I'm really excited to see it kind of unfold. I've got a follow-up question to what you've just kind of explained. And it's kind of about your approach to building Codeverse. And in a way, it's about maintaining your hustle within this respect, within Codeverse. So when you talk about the 1 million unfilled tech jobs by 2020 and how you're teaching kids today to have the skills that's going to help them tomorrow is going to be several years off for them. So while you're going to see some short-term like rewards, like, hey, they did this thing, the real rewards are going to come, say, like in 15, 20 years when they are building the next great things that our society uses. So knowing that like it's a real long-term reward for you, how are you like maintaining the enthusiasm and keeping the zeal, and how are you able to kind of do something that has such a long game in terms of seeing that thing come to fruition?
I mean, I think great question. And I think that this ultimately boils down to our mission. Like our mission is, and we defined this basically before we even came up with the name Codeverse, which was we want to teach 1 billion kids to code. Like we know that coding is important. We know that it's critical. We know that it's so important for kids to start while they're young, because kids absorb information in a different way from adults, right? And so our mission is to teach 1 billion kids to code. And Craig and I know that is something that isn't going to happen overnight. Like Craig and I know that this is an initiative that we're going to be working on for like the next 25 and 30 years. And it's a mission to get excited about, right? Like Craig and I love tech. We've been in this tech scene for 10 years. It's exciting. Like even seeing how technology in general has evolved over the past, 10, 15 years, right? And how the more entrepreneurs are like popping up and creating super innovative companies like Uber and Facebook and Postmates. And I mean, you're seeing it everywhere. Like this is the world that we live in now. And so to answer your question, like how do we maintain the hustle and how do we remain excited about it? I mean, it's just because we know that this is just such a vital skill. And we know that children have to start young. And you're right, for many of these kids, fine, they're learning KidScript and maybe they do KidScript for a couple of years, but then KidScript acts as a gateway into other languages. So kids graduate from KidScript and then they're learning Python, Ruby, and JavaScript, and then they're going on to build other things in other languages. And for me, that's super friggin' cool to know that we were like the entrance, right? Like the beginning stages of like their journey as technologists.
Yeah, you were the gateway drug for technology.
I can't think of anything cooler.
Well, awesome. Okay, so then where can our listeners find Codeverse, as well as what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, the best way to get in touch with me is I'm just Katy, Katy, at codeverse.com, or you can follow me on Twitter. I'm just at the Katy Lynch. To find out more about Codeverse, though, if you just go to codeverse.com, you'll see that there's 2 packages on our site. The first package is for week-long summer camps, and then the second, which commence in August, and then the second package is a monthly membership for $225 a month, and that gets children reoccurring weekly access into the space, as well as exclusive access to KidScript, which they can use at home.
And this is, and the studio or the classroom itself is located in the Chicago neighborhood of Lincoln Park, I believe? Yeah,
it is. So it's in Lincoln Park. It's at 819 West Eastman Street. The first classes start in July, but signups are happening right now.
Awesome. Okay, great. So then to wrap up today's conversation and bring it back to the meat of what we talked about today, our question for this episode was, how do you maintain your hustle? We will start with Victoria and close with Katy. So Victoria, based on what we've discussed, how do you maintain your hustle?
Okay, I think 2 things. Passion, for sure, 100%. I think when you lose that, you may still be sort of hustling, but I think it can be out of obligation or fear or other things outside of passion, and I think people feel that. And then the second, which I really hadn't thought of until this discussion, so thank you, Katy, is the sort of like healthy mind and healthy lifestyle, because I really, really do believe when you can incorporate that into your life, you can become, you stay more passionate about what it is that you're doing, and you have these revelations and these breakthroughs, and that keeps you on your hustle.
My answer for how do you maintain your hustle. So when I think about those 4 or 5 points, Katy, that you made off the bat, and then as we started talking, you mentioned this concept around like basically like earned, not given, and it's your life, no one owes you anything. Really what all of that summarized in my head for me was this concept, like you maintain your hustle by taking ownership of whatever the hell it is that you're doing. And I think it's so easy to resign to fate, to resign to, oh, the universe didn't want it to happen, or, to just be like, oh, well, I had no control over that. But really, if you have an ownership mindset of like, this is my, like, I can control these things, even the things you can't control, you will start to see, well, I do have some, I could have done these things differently, which could have produced a different result. And I think you're much less likely to fall off or to get distracted. Katy, how do you maintain your hustle?
Oh my gosh, we've touched upon a lot of things. But one that I really want to drive home again, and we talked a lot about it at the beginning of this podcast, is intellectual curiosity. Question everything, challenge everything, take risks, trust your gut. Fail, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and pick yourself, back up over and over again. That is what it takes.
Katy Lynch, Ouliot. The Ouliot is new, right? Like that's in the last 6 months or a year you added, right?
Actually, I've been married for almost 3 years. It's still Katy Lynch. My life should be Katy Elliott, but I haven't changed it yet because I've been too busy.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. This was very, very fun and very interesting to have the conversation with you.
Awesome. Take care. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Thanks, Katy.
That wrapped up our conversation with Katy Lynch Elliott. Katy, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom related to hustle. Not just having it, but keeping and maintaining it. Did you, the listener, enjoy this episode? If so, the best compliment you can give us is a rating and review on iTunes. Ratings and reviews help more people find the show, therefore more people get to discover their inner awesome. While you're there, go ahead and subscribe on whatever platform it is you listen to, whether that is iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, or the various other podcasting platforms this show is available on. For full show notes, references, and resources, as well as Katy's contact info and more on Codeverse, find it all at www.discoveryourinnerawesome.com. While you're there, check out our 80-plus episode archive and continue to dive into your inner awesome. That'll do it for this one. Thank you again to Katy Lynch Elliott for joining us. For Victoria Cohen, I am Raj Nation. You have been listening to the Discover Your Inner Awesome podcast. We will see you next time. But in the meantime, take care and be awesome today.